For thousands of years, humanity has been haunted by a single, recurring dream. It is a dream of a lost paradise, a golden age swallowed by the sea, a civilization of unparalleled power and beauty that vanished in a single day and night of misfortune. Among the countless myths and legends that formed the bedrock of human history, none possesses the enduring magnetism of Atlantis. This ghost island has captivated the minds of explorers, philosophers, scientists, and dreamers. It has inspired novels, blockbuster films, and endless academic debates. But what lies beneath the surface of this ancient story? Was Atlantis a real empire that once ruled the antediluvian world? Or was it merely a brilliant allegory crafted by the greatest philosopher of antiquity? To understand the truth, we must travel back through the mists of time, tracing the legend from the marble halls of ancient Greece to the deep-sea expeditions of the modern age. We must separate fact from fiction and look into the heart of a mystery that refuses to die. The story begins not in the pages of a fantasy novel, but in the serious philosophical works of Plato. Writing in the 4th century BC in his dialogues Timaeus and Critias, Plato introduced the world to a civilization that would spark 2 millennia of speculation. He did not present it as a fable, but as a history preserved by the priests of Egypt. According to the texts, the Athenian lawgiver Solon traveled to the Egyptian city of Sais, where he was greeted by aged priests who mocked the Greeks for their short memory. They told him of a time, 9,000 years prior, when a mighty power existed beyond the Pillars of Hercules, what we today know as the Strait of Gibraltar. This island empire was larger than Libya and Asia Minor combined. It was the domain of Poseidon, the god of the sea. Plato's description of Atlantis is startlingly precise, reading less like a myth and more like a geographical survey. He describes a city of concentric rings, alternating between water and land, engineered with a sophistication that rivaled the modern world. The Atlanteans were master builders. They constructed massive bridges, wide canals for ships to pass through, and defensive walls plated with precious metals. The outer wall was covered in brass, the inner in tin, and the wall of the central citadel flashed with the red light of orichalcum, a mysterious metal second in value only to gold. In the very center of the island stood the Temple of Poseidon, a structure of staggering opulence, filled with statues of gold and ivory. The island was rich in natural resources, teeming with exotic wildlife, including elephants, and blessed with hot and cold springs that fed lavish bathhouses. But Atlantis was more than just an architectural marvel. It was a political superpower. Ruled by a confederation of 10 kings, descendants of Poseidon's sons, the empire governed with absolute authority. For generations, they followed the divine laws, living in harmony and virtue. But as the divine bloodline diluted with mortal admixture, the Atlanteans fell victim to the most human of vices: greed, arrogance, and the hunger for conquest. They amassed a massive army and navy, launching an invasion of the Mediterranean, enslaving peoples and threatening the freedom of the known world. According to Plato, only the prehistoric Athenians, representing the ideal state, managed to withstand their assault. But the war did not end with a treaty. It ended with a cataclysm. The gods, angered by the moral decay of Atlantis, unleashed the earth's fury. Violent earthquakes and floods struck the world, and in a single terrifying 24-hour period, the island of Atlantis sank beneath the waves, leaving only an impassable shoal of mud in the Atlantic Ocean. For centuries after Plato's death, the story of Atlantis lingered in the background of history. Some ancient scholars took it literally, while others, including Plato's famous student Aristotle, dismissed it as a fabrication meant to illustrate philosophical points about the ideal state. As the Roman Empire fell and Europe entered the Middle Ages, the legend faded into obscurity. However, the story was destined to be reborn. The catalyst was the Age of Discovery. When Christopher Columbus returned from his voyage in 1492, the European worldview was shattered. A vast new continent had been found, inhabited by peoples with strange customs advanced cities, and pyramids that rivaled those of Egypt. The question arose immediately: who were these people? The Bible made no mention of them. It was not long before scholars began to connect the dots back to Plato. In the mid-16th century, Spanish historians began to suggest that the Americas were the remains of Atlantis. The similarities were seductive. The Aztec capital, Tenochtitlan, was built on an island in the middle of a lake, crisscrossed by canals, just like Plato's city. The indigenous peoples had legends of a great flood. They worshipped the sun and built towering temples. The word for water in the Aztec language was atl, and their legendary ancestral home was called Aztlan, the White Island. Could the survivors of the catastrophe have fled west to the Americas and east to Egypt, carrying the seeds of civilization with them? This idea took root and grew, evolving from a historical curiosity into a full-blown theory of human origins. The man who had turned this speculation into a global phenomenon was an American politician named Ignatius Donnelly. In 1882, he published a book titled Atlantis, the Antediluvian World, which became the Bible of Atlantology. Donnelly was a man of immense intellect and persuasive power. He argued that Atlantis was the first civilization, the mother culture from which all others sprang. He meticulously cataloged parallels between cultures on opposite sides of the Atlantic. He pointed to the pyramids of Egypt and the pyramids of Mexico. He noted the practice of mummification in both the Old and New Worlds. He compared languages, flood myths, and astronomical calendars. For Donnelly, these were not coincidences. They were proof of a common heritage. He proposed that the Atlantic Ocean once bridged by a continent, allowing for the diffusion of agriculture, writing, and metallurgy. Donnelly's work captivated the public imagination, cementing the idea of Atlantis not as a myth, but as a lost chapter of history waiting to be rediscovered. As the 20th century dawned, the search for Atlantis moved from libraries to the field, and it also took a turn into the mystical. Figures like the American psychic A.C. Casey propelled the legend into the realm of the supernatural. Casey gave readings in a trance state, describing Atlantis as a technologically advanced society with crystals, aircraft, and death rays. He famously predicted that parts of Atlantis would rise from the sea near the Bahamas in 1968. In a bizarre twist of fate, in that very year, pilots flying over North Bimini discovered a formation of stones in shallow water that looked suspiciously like a paved road or a submerged wall. Known as the Bimini Road, this underwater structure fueled a media frenzy. Expeditions were launched and believers claimed they had found the outer walls of the lost city. Geologists, however, were less convinced, identifying the formation as beach rock, a natural sedimentary rock that fractures in rectangular patterns. Yet for many, the Bimini Road remains a tantalizing clue. While enthusiasts scoured the Atlantic, mainstream science began to look closer to home for the origins of Plato's story. Modern oceanography and the theory of plate tectonics have effectively ruled out the existence of a sunken continent in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. The ocean floor is made of dense basalt, not the lighter granite that makes up continental landmasses. There is simply no geological evidence that a continent existed there and sank. However, this does not mean Plato made the whole thing up. Many historians and archaeologists now believe that the legend of Atlantis is a memory of a very real, very terrifying event that occurred in the Mediterranean. Around 1600 BC, the island of Thera, known today as Santorini, was the site of a flourishing Bronze Age culture, the Minoans. They were a sophisticated maritime power, trading with Egypt and the Levant. Their palaces on nearby Crete were marvels of engineering, with running water and vibrant frescoes depicting bulls and sea life. But Thera was also a volcano. When it erupted, it was one of the largest volcanic events in human history. The explosion was thousands of times more powerful than the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima. The center of the island collapsed into the sea, creating a massive caldera. The resulting tsunamis devastated the Minoan fleet and coastal settlements on Crete. Ash darkened the sky for days, reaching as far as Egypt.
The parallels between the Minoan catastrophe and the Atlantis legend are striking. The Minoans were a great naval power. They had a bull cult, just like Plato described the Atlanteans sacrificing bulls. Their civilization was destroyed by a combination of earthquakes and floods. It is highly probable that the memory of this trauma survived in oral traditions passed down to the Egyptians who recorded the fall of the Keftiu, or people of the islands. Centuries later, when Solon visited Egypt, he heard these ancient accounts. When Plato finally wrote them down, the timeline had been exaggerated, the location moved beyond the known world, and the size of the island inflated. But the core of the story, a great civilization destroyed by water and fire, was real.
Despite this strong case for Thera, the human imagination refuses to be confined. In recent years, the search has gone global. Researchers have claimed to find Atlantis in the marshlands of southern Spain, citing satellite imagery of ring-like structures near Cadiz. Others have looked to the Black Sea, theorizing that the rising waters at the end of the last ice age breached the Bosporus, flooding Neolithic settlements and creating the flood myths. Some have even looked to Antarctica, suggesting that Earth's crust shifted, moving in the end, whether Atlantis lies beneath the volcanic ash of Santorini, under the sands of the Spanish coast, or merely within the pages of a philosopher's dialogue, its legacy is secure. It challenges us to explore, to question history, and to look at the map of our world with a sense of wonder. The ocean covers 70% of our planet, and much of it remains unexplored. As long as there are depths to sound and mysteries to solve, the search for Atlantis will continue. The city may be lost, but the dream of finding it will never sink.